Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. My name is Raza Panjwani, and I am Senior Policy Counsel for Connectivity here at New America's Open Technology Institute. New America is dedicated to renewing the promise of America by continuing to realize our nation's highest ideals, honestly confronting the challenges posed by rapid technological and social changes, and seizing the opportunities that those changes create. OTI is part of New America's group of technology and democracy programs, and OTI's mission is to advocate for policy and technical solutions that promote equitable access to digital technology and its benefits. The deployment of modern, reliable, high-speed broadband infrastructure to connect every American has long been a focal point of closing the digital divide. However, achieving universal connectivity requires more than just deployment. And today, we'll hear from state broadband directors and community-focused organizations about their efforts to promote adoption. We're delighted to bring you today's program in partnership with the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation and the National Digital Inclusion Alliance. Now, I'd like to turn the program over to Jessica Dine, Policy Analyst here at OTI.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. Today, we're going to talk about a key part of broadband policy. Now, if you're at all involved in the broadband space, you've probably heard about BEAD, the federal funding program through NTIA that gives states and territories the money to finish deployment of broadband infrastructure across the country. What you may have heard less about is another set of programs that were also conceived alongside BEAD, the Digital Equity Act programs, which fund digital inclusion and opportunity initiatives across the country. And with the current uncertainty surrounding federal funding, it's a good time for us to step back, examine these programs, and talk about what they actually do. Now, I'm not going to say much more about this. I'll leave to our panelists. But one thing I'll leave you with is that when it comes to broadband policy, though deployment is often where the money goes and often what a lot of the discussion centers around, there is a vast world of policy priorities and initiatives to talk about outside of that. And that's what we'll hear about today. So for the run of show, first, we're going to have a fireside chat with two representatives from state broadband offices who've been kind enough to join. States play an ongoing and tremendous role in broadband policy, both the regulation and obviously the execution. And right now, broadband offices across the country are helming the implementation of a handful of critical federal programs, all created under the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act of 2021, that are together meant to provide the country with universal broadband connectivity and use. So we'll first get their perspective. After that, I'll be having a discussion with 5 panelists that can provide a more local perspective on adoption initiatives like those funded by the DEA. And since we have so many great panelists today, we might go a little bit over time. I am aiming to get to audience questions at 3 p.m. ET. So now I'd like to introduce our 2 broadband office representatives. First, Glenn Howey is the director of the Arkansas State Broadband Office, where he serves as Chief Broadband Advisor to Governor Sanders. He's guiding the state's broadband infrastructure and digital opportunity planning and implementation. Next, we have Joshua Breitbart, who's Senior Vice President of ConnectAll at Empire State Development, where he serves as Director of the Division of Broadband Access in New York and is overseeing the state's BEAD and digital equity plans. So thank you so much to you both for being here. And with that, let's get started. Glenn, I think I'll direct this first question to you. Just for a little bit of stage setting, could you please talk us through the IIJA, the relevant pieces, and explain both the basics and the interplay of these 2 grant programs that it created, BEAD and the DEA?
Yeah, thank you, Jessica, for having me and being able to be here today. I'm very glad to take part and sort of express Arkansas's perspective from the Arkansas State Broadband Office about all things broadband, specifically today, BEAD and DEA. Again, glad to be here. Look, broadband itself is really a nonpartisan, non-political issue. I think everyone would agree that in today's 21st century digital economy, everyone needs access to affordable, reliable, high-speed internet. But when you go out on the road and you talk to everyday folks, I always think about Joe at the diner when we're walking through how we talk about what we do here at the Arkansas State Broadband Office. And you go to Joe and you say, Joe, when you think about broadband or internet, what do you think, right? 9 times out of 10, he's going to say access or infrastructure, right? Wires on the poles, et cetera. That's where most folks' minds are. if they're not in the broader broadband ecosphere. So the way that we battle that, and this gets to explain IJA and the programs within it, we talk about our three pillars of broadband: access, affordability, and opportunity. The illustration that we like to use is that we could make Arkansas the most wired state in this country. We could run fiber broadband to every single home and business in this state. But if some of our folks can't afford it, right, that's an issue that we have to work through. Likewise, we can run fiber for folks. We can hypothetically make it free for folks. But if they don't have the proper digital devices to leverage it, digital skills to operate those devices, understand the opportunity that arises from broadband access and how that can impact their lives for the better, we have to attack all three at the same time. And that's what IJA was intended to do. So within the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the BEAD program, or Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program, was focused on the access side, or the infrastructure piece, along with some affordability metrics within that particular program. Hitting the third pillar, this opportunity piece that is equally as important as the other two, you had the Digital Equity Act, or DEA, right? And so while BEAD tackles access, and through that program and how states have implemented it, affordability, the DEA is that last third pillar of broadband, that opportunity piece, that if we don't attack, then the investments on the access side really are for naught. So that's how the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or IJA, through its broadband programs, are trying to attack all three pillars of broadband.
That's really helpful framing. So you're saying universal connectivity, which is our shared goal, doesn't just mean the infrastructure. That's part of it, but it means people using those networks, which means attacking the problem through a variety of avenues. Thank you. That's great. Josh, I think I'll turn to you next. So under these two programs, BEAD and DEA, your states put together digital equity plans in addition to those BEAD plans that you put together. So could you explain how your states both go together, and in general, how the two go together, and then your state's overall approach to the digital equity plan?
Yeah, so the two efforts, as Glenn said, they work in concert. They don't necessarily have to exactly align in terms of where we're making the grants. The investments that we can make with the digital equity funds are building the capacity of these digital equity organizations and partnerships across the state. And they're in position to work with internet service providers, regardless of whether they are getting grants from us or not. And that's really key, because there's a huge opportunity to increase connectivity and address the business opportunity to serve people who do have access and maybe are facing barriers that aren't even based on cost or infrastructure. These non-infrastructure, non-cost barriers. And that's why the digital equity funding is so crucial. And so the planning process is a statewide engagement, not just focused on the locations that don't have service, but really the entire state. So for us, we held listening sessions in every region of New York. We worked with coalitions of community organizations and local government stakeholders in every region to strengthen that engagement. And we also convened a task force of state agencies. One of the key things is that there is already and has been immense activity. Some of it is government funding under different programs that might have different types of names, philanthropic support, or local efforts. The Digital Equity Act and the funding that comes to the state, and having it be part of the state broadband office, means we now have a coherent strategy and one coordinating entity that brings purpose and direction to all of that activity across the state.
So it sounds like this strategy you're talking about, a lot of it is meant to directly meet the stated needs of communities. And as I understand it, that was a major part of both plans for every participating state, which is all of them, the requirement to solicit community input and feedback to shape your plan. And I've looked through the state plans myself, and I remember nobody shirked that responsibility. They are all brimming with direct community input.
Yeah, and I would add that it's really also for New York, and I think this is true for every state, to build on what's successful, to look at what assets you have in place in terms of partnerships. We each built an inventory of all those assets that exist, so that none of this funding would be reinventing the wheel. And it's one-time funding, so we're all focused on how to build capacity that endures through these partnerships that are directly oriented to meet the needs of communities across the state.
That is super helpful and definitely a key point that we will be coming back to again and again through this webinar. I think, Glenn, going off of what we've said so far, I guess for those in the audience who are less familiar, when we are talking about closing the digital divide, why is infrastructure not enough? I know we've touched on this, but for Arkansas, could you tell me a little bit about specific barriers that your population faces that are not related to the infrastructure itself?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Jessica, for that. And look, if you look at sort of the traditional groups out there that would, on average have lower internet adoption rates, really there's kind of 8 or 9 groups out there. And when you look at the statistics, they have a lower than expected adoption rate, including folks over the age of 60, those that live in rural areas, right? All of our wonderful veterans across the country. When you look at all 8 or 9 groups, that those groups make up about 87.4% of Arkansas's population. So really, at least here, it really affects all of us. And so, as part of our planning around our digital skills and opportunity plan, much as Josh has stated, we did a lot of planning work to go through that with surveys and focus groups. And with over 12,000 responses to our digital skills and opportunity survey, here in Arkansas, beyond access and affordability, our first 2 pillars, right, the broadband puzzle, nearly a third, in Arkansas reported that their main barrier to reliable internet access was 1, not knowing how to even find out which ISP serviced their area, or 2, not knowing how to get connected at all, period, right? So what that indicates for us is that a very large barrier to internet adoption in the state of Arkansas, and likely around the country, has to do with digital skills. And so that's where we're focusing our efforts for the most part. We think in the traditional working age bracket of 18 to 64, there's about 300,000 Arkansans that lack basic digital skills. Okay, so we're not talking about coding or creating websites. I'm saying take the mouse, go to Google, apply for a job, right? 300,000 Arkansans in that traditional working age bracket of 18 to 64. So if we think about small business development, entrepreneurial endeavors, quality of life, right? Focusing in on that digital skills barrier, which for us, again, was highlighted through survey responses and focus groups. That's where we want to take it. One of the things that we have to do, look, only 1 in 10 Arkansans are actually even interested in attending a digital skills curriculum class in person, right? So we're going to offer in person in every county, but also an online option as well, because 90% of folks don't want to go in person to do a digital skills class. So we're going to have to get creative. One of the ways that we are getting creative is using what we call a learn and earn model. So as folks go through our digital skills curriculum and make it all the way and sort of get certified that they completed it, that would enable them and qualify them for a low cost or free large screen digital device to help further their progress in the 21st century digital economy, and then incorporating what we're calling a +1 skill. So whether it's agricultural based, agriculture is one of our legacy industries here in Arkansas. We're the #1 rice producer in the country here in Arkansas, whether it's health related or telehealth. Not only will folks go through a basic digital skills training curriculum that will help them with their job prospects moving forward, but we're also going to add that +1 skill so they'll be able to choose, right? I want to focus more on agriculture related digital skills or telehealth related digital skills to help them move that much forward. And so that's how we're looking at the barrier in Arkansas, and that's where our focus is.
So going back to what you mentioned about agriculture digital skills, I'm really curious about the way we can curate these programs to address specific fields. Could you tell me a little bit more about, I know you've got an agricultural specific digital skills curriculum.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're trying to attack this through a multitude of ways, right? Arkansas thinks as though, not to hit on the BEAD one too much today on that BEAD side, we think through our highly efficient process, we may have some excess funding on the BEAD side. And one of the things that we'll look at doing, should we run that course, is looking at, for instance, finding a way to help farmers across the state pay for new machinery and technology that has a higher connectivity point with the internet and help them with precision agriculture and increasing crop yields and so forth. Not only doing that, but then looking at help digitally upskilling them so they know how to operate the new machinery that's connected, right? So we're going that route with non-deployment potential excess funds on the BEAD side, but also offering folks, look, you have a lot of folks who work in agriculture in the state of Arkansas that are not, right, the farmer himself, but workers all across the state who go and do hard work every single day. And if we, through this program, can help those folks learn more about how internet can help their work every day and help to enable that, we're going to do that.
Got it, thanks. And this is a nice segue into a question that I'd now like to direct to Josh. This is maybe something I should have started with, but could you talk to us about why any of this matters? I guess, why are we as a country putting so much emphasis and so much money into achieving universal connectivity? I think we're well beyond the point where broadband is just a thing in itself. It influences every sector out there. So could you talk us through some examples of that?
And I think one of the thing that's so great about Glenn's example, and you can find these from all across the state, it's just how much value that adds to the internet and the private and public investments that have gone into making that service available for people. But that work that you're talking about, that layers on top of just getting access to the internet, that allows it to meet the state's economic development goals or an individual household's or person's personal goals. That's not something that the internet service provider can deliver. That's something that has to be layered on top of that. And achieving all those different impacts. And again, that's why working with each local community is so important, is to understand what are those purposes. So we have regional economic development plans, and we try to align digital equity purposes and these grants to meet those regional goals, just like every community organization is aligned to meet an individual person's or household's goals and what they support. These networks get more valuable the more that people use them, the more that people are connected to them, and not just for those people, but for everybody who's online. If you're trying to deliver business services online or government services or health services, the more people that get connected, the more valuable this is for everybody. And the more that people who can use telehealth and might not need to go in an emergency room, the more that benefits everybody. So this is really about making this infrastructure truly valuable and impactful for every community, for every state and territory, and for everybody who's invested public or private funds into making these networks available.
Okay, we've got about 3 minutes left in this section, so I'd like to give you each a chance to give any final thoughts that you want to get across. Glenn, I'll pass it first to you.
Yeah, thank you, Jessica. Yeah, just to close up real quick, I think returning back to what I led off our fireside chat with, right? If we think about the three pillars, access, affordability, and opportunity, that's why the BEAD program and DEA programs, I call them sister programs, were designed as they were. We have to attack all three pillars at the same time. That's what these particular programs are doing, and we should see it through the promise of those programs.
Great, thank you.
Well, I want to thank New America, ITIF, and NDIA for convening this conversation today. It's timely, it's critically important. I also just want to appreciate also the next part of this event, the panelists, because these community organizations and nonprofit organizations are critical. The expertise that they bring, just like internet service providers bring a technical expertise to getting that part of this nationwide effort done, these organizations bring a unique set of relationships and expertise into achieving this goal. And so I greatly appreciate their work, the work of the partners that we have in New York. And again, for this trio of organizations to convene this next panel to hear directly from those experts.
Wonderful, thank you so much. And I was planning to do a transition, but I don't think I need to now. I'd like to say a huge thank you to both Glenn and Joshua, and we will now transition to the panel part of this webinar. So I've got 5 panelists from a combination of local governments and nonprofit organizations, and I'm delighted to hear from all of them. They'll really be able to give us the more local perspective on this issue. So first, I'd like to bring up Daiquiri Ryan Marcato. Daiquiri leads the Digital Equity and Opportunity Initiative, a philanthropic partnership focused on building and sustaining place-based digital inclusion coalitions in the South and Southwest. So Daiquiri, for your first question, could you please talk about how adoption fits into deployment? We're basically trying to get an academic and theoretical understanding here, informed by your long history of practice in this field. How are the grants structured, and why were they structured in the way that they were?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me and for having DEI as a part of this conversation. Adoption is needed really as the next step after deployment. I think a lot of people assume a mentality of if we build it, they'll come, but data shows us that that's not always true. So in areas where broadband access is historically low, there's often another layer of work that needs to be done to ensure that folks understand the value or utility of having access to the internet in their everyday lives, as well as how to use the internet itself. So much of what, was talked about in the fireside chat. But when you think about who provides those gap services to ensure that deployment then leads to adoption of broadband, oftentimes it's community anchor institutions, local nonprofits, or other direct service organizations in each community. So grants under the Digital Equity Act were created to support that type of work and those types of organizations. And these are the folks who are already trusted leaders in their communities and have a really deep lived understanding of what the digital divide looks like in their communities and what solutions are actually going to move the needle to solve it.
Got it. And we are now at the third stage of the Digital Equity Act programs, which gets hyperlocal. We're doing the digital equity competitive grants right now, which direct funding directly from the federal government to these local organizations. And your explanation was a great segue into my next question. Can you sort of describe this field of digital inclusion organizations? Who are they? What different kinds are there? How do they do their work?
Absolutely. So I think some folks might, perceive that there are dozens of organizations in every state that solely provide digital inclusion services, and that's who would benefit from these grants and programs. And while there's definitely some incredible organizations that are like that, what we have found is that the majority of folks working on digital inclusion are experts in other issue areas that are deeply impacted by the digital divide. So for example, DEOI, our initiative, is built on the idea that civic infrastructure, or in other words, the way in which organizations communicate and collaborate with each other, can be used for digital equity amongst many other issue areas. And we're structured this way because our currently 7 place-based coalitions are made up of members with a wide variety of expertise and focus. So the coalition's purpose is to engage in digital inclusion efforts, but our membership in each state consists of folks working on food insecurity, senior citizen advocacy, census work, kind of you name it, the run of the gambit. And beyond that, what we're really excited to see in a couple of the states in the South and Southwest, as a result of this program, is public-private partnerships that are extremely tailored to fit the needs of the communities that they serve. So local leaders teaming up with local businesses to come together to solve digital inclusion challenges with the support of state broadband offices. And it's just a really great snapshot of what's possible in this space.
Great, thank you. And briefly, and we have all touched on this many times, but just to put a finer point on it, why is this implementation at the local level so important? Why has there been so much emphasis on that?
Absolutely. So it's incredibly important because of the nature of the digital divide. Each community needs different resources in order to move the needle towards adoption. One example of DEOI grantees working at the hyperlocal level that we've really seen success with is in North Carolina with our grantee NC Counts. They essentially have provided microgrants to train and hire digital navigators in the 10 counties within the state of North Carolina with the lowest levels of broadband adoption with NTIA covered populations. So those digital navigators are trusted leaders in their counties, and they really have a pulse on what their communities need. And then they've been able to use that local expertise to help inform the digital inclusion plans and programming at the county level, and then feeding that into the state broadband office and the state's plans.
Really helpful, thank you. And you've been great, Daiquiri, thanks. We are now going to turn to the personification of one of these grant winners. Sarah Nichols works in broadband and digital equity in Western North Carolina for the Land of Sky Regional Council, where she's helped leverage funding to connect nearly 20,000 people with broadband for the first time and lead a regional comprehensive digital access ecosystem. And I should say Sarah, along with the remaining panelists, have all been recommended for award for the competitive grants by NTIA. So congratulations to all of you. Sarah, I think for the first question, could you tell us a little bit about Land of Sky and explain what it is and what you do?
Sure, thanks for the question. So I am the Energy and Economic Development Program Manager at Land of Sky Regional Council. We are a council of government, or locally known as COGS. These are all across the country. They might be called planning commissions, local development districts. They're locally led regional units of government. So we are in the government ecosystem, but we take local priorities that might be bigger than either a small town or county, and we use a comprehensive strategy plan called the SEDS to leverage what those priorities are. Lots of funding, grant writing, and technical expertise.
And I imagine based on your location, you've been impacted and had to do a lot of work after the recent hurricanes.
Yes, so we serve Western North Carolina, where Hurricane Helene wreaked havoc on our communities. Anything we were working on prior that was already important, like the digital divide, just exacerbated by the storm that came through town. It devastated thousands of miles of infrastructure for us. It's a $65 billion expense, over 100 lives lost. And we saw a unique opportunity for what does digital equity look like after a storm. I don't see a lot of research or information. I definitely looked into it for a time because we are needed most. We're community connectors. We had a system where communications and power were both down. So what's our place there? I used my network of community professionals and folks I've met through this working in this space for a long time, including the NDIA, to help us get some work off the ground very quickly. And that included just getting folks online very broadly, whatever that meant. We launched something I called the Technology Recovery Program. As infrastructure was coming back online, we noticed that people had lost the device. Either it went with their job instantly, or physically they lost it. It's at the bottom of the river somewhere, and internet isn't that useful without having the tool that accesses. So we've been running a refurbishment program in-house that I've been saving for some other projects, but I couldn't justify keeping it there. We launched this program to replace devices for folks that lost them to the storm. We've served over 1,000 people. We've navigated over 700 folks. It catalyzed our work.
And that's the thing about disasters. So often they cast a spotlight on exactly how important these communications networks are. They are the thing that sustains us. So as I already mentioned, you applied for the competitive grants despite all of this, and NTIA has already recommended you for award. So congratulations. And could you please talk me through the plan for that grant money?
Sure, we submitted that application days before it was due. If things had gone just a little bit differently on that storm, we would not have been able to submit it. We were addressing issues we had pre-storm that are exacerbated. So in reality, I need a lot more money than the nearly 8 million that we're hopefully going to get out of this project. But it underscores some of the priority populations on our demographics. So we have a veteran healthcare access program through a nonprofit that serves the VA here to increase veteran healthcare in rural areas. We have an aging digital navigator program that we're expanding on through the other councils of government, along with these computer labs in rural areas and a mobile computer lab we call the Digibus, with some libraries without borders methodology.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Sarah. I think I'm going to now pass the mic to Taylor Stuckert, who serves as the interim CEO of Lead for America and the executive director of the American Connection Corps, the flagship AmeriCorps service program of Lead for America, which is working to connect people to places and possibilities in digitally disconnected communities across America. So Taylor, first question, as another group that was recommended for award by NTIA, can you tell me a little bit about your org and what you're planning to do with these funds when you receive them?
Yeah, thanks, Jessica, and thanks for having us, all of us panelists, to talk about our important work. So yeah, Lead for America, as you mentioned, we're focused on building place-based service opportunities for all Americans nationwide, and our flagship program, the American Connection Corps, is an AmeriCorps national service program, focused on serving digitally disconnected communities across the country. And so our program, it's an intergenerational service program. It places members for a year or more of service with nonprofit or public agencies across the country. So currently we have about 115 members serving in about 30 states across the country. And they serve in these various host site partners, and our community partners represent really a wide range of entity types. So they could be state broadband offices like Glenn and the state of Arkansas. We have a couple of members placed there, but they also include extension agencies, regional planning commissions, counties, municipalities, libraries, or other nonprofits working on the front line of the digital divide at the local level. And we recruit our members from the places we serve. So, really want to focus on building on that local connection that our members have with the communities that they're serving, and to support our community partners to really build a position description and service opportunities that best suit their needs. But they often fit into a few high-level buckets between community and economic development, agriculture and natural resources, and health and social capital. And our members represent a wide range of lived experiences. So we have recent high school graduates in the program. We have adults with some college no degree, college graduates, mid to late career folks, and even some retirees. So we have younger and older adults serving urban and rural communities together across the country. And our plan with the DEA funds is to provide 80 slot placements, so 80 members each year for 3 years to community partners in 14 states. So these members would be providing critical direct services to support digital adoption efforts of those local organizations that they're placed with, and would be leading those efforts in their community. In addition, we provide extensive training to our members on technical skills and civic leadership in partnership with experts in this space, and in an effort to support and help grow these amazing leaders across the country, and really focus on positioning them for continued opportunities beyond service work. So these DEA funds really support our efforts to expand our reach, the reach of our program to some of the hardest to reach communities in the country. And these funds are matched by our private philanthropic partners and other grant resources to fully support the cost of the program. And then the specific work the members will be doing will really, as I mentioned, vary around different aspects of digital adoption based on the needs and strategic focus of the host site partner and the community. And as I mentioned, we're really not prescriptive about this. We respect each community is facing different circumstances. But I think the other point I want to add is that we're often thinking about the possibilities that this work unlocks. This is not just about that immediate need, which is critical and important, but really the many future doors that are open, whether it's healthcare related, education, entrepreneurship. This not only is a necessity right now, but it's also a tremendous generator of future opportunities.
That makes total sense. So you're just building this network of communication and resource sharing. And we need exactly that, because that's investing in the future. We cannot predict what tech or tech usage requirements will do in the future, but you can create this network of people ready to help upgrade communities. I know you said the programs aren't prescriptive, and that definitely gets at digital inclusion best practices, targeting programs to the needs of that local community. Could you maybe give me an example of one of those programs?
Yeah, sure. I can give you a couple. So, as I mentioned, we really work with our local community partners to develop those service opportunities that are really tailored to their community needs and opportunities. And so while there's a clear thread running through our national cohort of service members, really each community manifests this work uniquely. And so, in one community, it may focus on device distribution. So we have like Deanna Flores and Jack Bain in Westminster, Maryland, who delivered over 5,000 devices, Chromebooks, and hotspots in their community. Or it may focus on digital literacy in another community. So we have 8 members right now across the state of Idaho serving as digital navigators in rural communities in partnership with the University of Idaho Extension. And they're doing things, among other things, teaching digital literacy skills, such as supporting older adults on how to utilize telehealth platforms, which is something that's increasingly becoming a critical service for these rural communities. In some cases, it may, in the past, a lot of work around affordability. So when there was an ACP program, in 1 year, our members enrolled nearly 10,000 households in that program. So they can be door to door, they can be boots on the ground. And so the nature of the work, again, just depends on the community and their priorities. But by working together as a national cohort, our community partners are actually able to learn from each other, share resources, knowledge, and build community connections that might not otherwise have formed without the program. And for our members and communities alike, this type of engagement work is life impacting and a learning opportunity. So we see a lot of our members develop new career opportunities through this experience to serve beyond the year of service. So they might go to work for that community partner beyond service. And then so for our community partners and the communities we're serving, often this is not only direct service support, but this is talent recruitment and attraction in these important social impact sectors for our host sites and communities where these needs are often the greatest.
It's really helpful, Taylor. Thanks. I'm next going to turn it over to Megan Waiters, who's a digital navigator at the Community Service Programs of West Alabama, based out of the Housing Services Department, where she assists people with learning digital skills, distributing digital devices, and accessing affordable internet services. So thank you, Megan, for being here. first, like everybody else, could you please tell me a little bit about what your org does and also what you're planning to do with the DEA funds once you receive them?
Thanks for having me, Jessica. Here at Community Service Programs of West Alabama, we're a private nonprofit community action agency, and we're very dedicated to improving the quality of life for low-income and vulnerable populations here in West Alabama. We provide services that resolve immediate needs and lead to long-term self-sufficiency for our clients. And so the Digital Navigator program is actually based out of our housing department. And so with the clients that we see on a daily basis, those clients are lacking either the digital skills or the devices, or they're having trouble affording internet services. And so with those barriers, they have problems actually gaining the assistance that they need through our agency. And so the Digital Navigator program has been so effective at bridging that gap between our communities and helping them to be self-sufficient. With the DEA funds, we've been doing digital skills classes. We partner with an ACP provider to provide tablets to about 700 clients over the last 2 years. And so with the digital skills classes, we partner with our libraries in our rural counties to teach those classes. And so we had clients that were able to receive devices, laptop devices from those services. We're actually, and so thankful for this, we're actually part of the NDIA cohort of digital navigators. And so with the DEA funds in the competitive grant, we're actually going to be using those funds as part of a sub-grantee for NDIA. And so with everything that we've been doing, we're going to focus on expanding those services, doing education, being tech, being health, being work and social and civic engagements.
Great, thank you. Now, coming out of the Housing Services Department, can you talk a little bit about the programs that relate housing to digital inclusion? How does digital literacy play into that?
Okay, so we have financial capabilities, housing rehabilitation, housing stability, counseling program, and rentals. And so with all of those services, everything is online now. And so when we're looking at the education piece, the financial fitness and credit building classes, where we're actually going to be assisting people with banking and downloading banking apps onto their phone, along with the education of actually how can they be sustainable in their finances so that they can obtain self-sufficiency in their homes. We have a first-time home buyer program. That application and that education is online. And so what we've seen is a lot of our clients don't have the digital skills that are needed. And so we're tying all of these things together. So they'll get the digital skills, they'll get the devices, and they'll be able to access these services. Within the DN tech space, again, we've been doing digital skills classes, and I created a concept of digital bingo. So we've been doing that at our partnerships in the libraries. And we tied that with the North Star curriculum and disaster preparedness. So we were teaching people how to download the FEMA app onto their devices, how to actually scan emergency documents onto flash drives so that they were prepared for storms when they came within the DN health space. One of our rural libraries has actually been granted a virtual medical center inside the library. And so we were going to partner with them to help those clients navigate that digital space of actually how to use the virtual medical center. And that service is free to clients, no insurance, no copay. And so there's a great benefit for them. So we want to make sure that they're able to access those things. For the DN work, we've been partnering with the Tuscaloosa Career Center. We're going to be teaching some digital skills classes there. And so what I've been learning is as they're having clients come in and they're preparing them for work, they're facing the same challenges. Many of them can't access their email. Many of them don't know how to apply online for a job application. And so that's what that partnership that we're gonna have with them is gonna be pretty effective, I believe. And for the social and civic, we have a whole new system where our clients that receive our rental services through our properties are gonna be able to actually log in and manage their own payment systems. And so everything is digital, everything has changed. And so we want to make sure that we're helping people, especially these vulnerable populations that we serve, get what they need from the digital space. And so these DEA funds are so vital here in Alabama, especially for the vulnerable populations that we're serving.
That makes so much sense. And I think you've really underscored this point that digital skills and, the use of the internet provide a pathway to every sector you can think of. They are not a thing in themselves. They are the way we access healthcare, housing, government services, which if you want to talk about efficiency, if government services can be fully online, that will save a lot of overhead. So thank you, Megan. I'm going to turn last to Jennifer Carlson, who is the co-founder and CEO of Apprenty, which facilitates apprenticeships and upskilling. So Jennifer, thank you for being here. Could you please tell me a little bit about Apprenty and what you do?
Certainly, and thank you very much for having us here today. I very much appreciate this. Apprenti is sort of the other half of this equation that we're hearing from everybody on the local implementation and how these funds are being used to support everybody at the user level. We're at the other end of this in trying to leverage all that work to build another workforce to augment what we're getting out of the college system. Apprentice is a nationally registered tech apprenticeship program that's focused on producing net new talent for mid-level STEM careers. As an intermediary working with the Department of Labor and the Department of Commerce, Apprenti is an employer-driven model. So we focus on the other half or the other end of this spectrum with 25 occupations that have been filed at the federal and many state levels that the industry has informed of as being relatable, able to be filled by an apprentice, meaning we're willing to look at competencies and the skill sets as opposed to pedigree. Our industry, from a tech perspective, as you just pointed out, is ubiquitous. Tech is in every sector. Tech is used and consumed by every company on some level. And the population has to be capable of leveraging and using it, but at the same time, we also need to be able to support it. So we work with state and labor offices. We work with a variety of other agencies like the VA and vocational rehab offices to get systems in place that can support the employer's ability to hire, work with the employers to establish what the training requirements are, identify and secure the training that's needed, and when necessary, can even work with employers to bring in some of the talent at the local levels that can do this work. We as an intermediary also, however, are kind of the other half of this equation. And while I embrace and agree with everything that Joshua and Glenn talked about earlier in the fact that these are local decisions, because what's challenging is at a local level. It's a little different in every geo. What isn't true is where employers are looking for things. Employers don't see state lines and don't see boundaries. They're looking for continuity of delivery. And on the workforce development side, our role is to help consolidate that. So as we think about NTIA and these funds, the companies are going to be leveraging these funds through us once they're distributed so that we can underwrite the training costs that can get their workforce up to a level that can work across every state at the same level to deliver on all of those promises that are being made by these organizations to get the accessibility of the technology at a local level.
Of course. So being in the broadband space, something I hear a lot about is the workforce shortage, especially now that all states are trying to deploy broadband at the same time. Could you give an example of the type of skills gaps that you're talking about? Is that an example of one?
That is a perfect example of one. So when we think of skills gap, it's a twofold issue. We have the fact that our industry as a whole has put a barrier to entry of a college degree on every job and is treating them equally when they're not equal jobs. Most of the employers were at 300 employers, many of whom are in the enterprise space, like Verizon and AT&T, come to the table and look at this as there's a geographically bound limitation with both the funding and the systems, but there isn't on the workforce side. And so we've depleted the 100,000 people that come out of college degrees that they can consume across all industries. And we only produce 100,000 people a year in this country with related degrees for these kinds of roles. But we're consuming or creating 350,000 new jobs a year in the tech space, not including some of the less technical jobs, but are still around installations and development at a localized level. But the job looks the same in Florida as it does in Washington State. And so their need at a national level is to holistically approach the training a little bit differently than the way it's being done at a local level in terms of implementation.
Great, thank you. Now, I'd like to turn to a group discussion. And for the audience, if you've been thinking of any questions as you're listening, please feel free to start putting them in the chat. We will be turning to audience questions after this. But we've got about 15 minutes left here, and I've got a few questions that I want to address to all of you. First, measurement of success and implementation has been a huge part of both BEAD and DEA. We want to ensure that we can measure what the funds are doing and actually assess how successful they are being. So Megan, I might direct this to you. With your programs, how are you measuring success?
So one of the ways that we measure, we use the Airtable platform where all of the clients that I see are entered into Airtable. So we have their demographics in there. Actually use for every client, I do a skills assessment. And so just to assess where they are at the beginning of services, and then to assess them again at the end after they've received advice or after they've completed a digital skills class. And so that's one of the ways that we're gonna kind of measure our success with the DA funds.
That's great, thank you. I guess next I'll ask a similar question with the programs that are being funded. I know a lot of you talked about the fact that you will be using these funds to scale existing programs, but for any programs that are either being created with the funds or that will scale further, what's this plan for scaling things across the country? Because again, DEA is a one-time infusion of funds, and these are forever issues. I think, Sarah, I might address this to you.
Sure. So we have a geographic footprint we serve. And I agree with you that this work is foundational in every other community issue we face: education, workforce, healthcare, transportation, food access. So rather than looking at it in silos, the way we've parsed it out, we're strategizing ways that we can embed digital equity into every program area everywhere. We have an upcoming opportunity that we'll be announcing soon. We've signed a contract with the Benton Institute to build a broader geography and advocacy coalition around these issues. So that'll take us out of 4 counties and into 18, funded by Dogwood Health Trust, which has been a very strategic partner at seeing that vision with us, that the future of this doesn't solely have to be digital equity for digital equity's sake, because it's really digital equity for community's sake.
A great way of putting it. So going back to the programs that are at the heart of all of this, IIJA designed both BEAD for deployment and DEA programs adoption to be implemented semi-concurrently, and both all over overseen by NTIA. Could somebody speak to the benefits of that structure that's got the kind of federal oversight, but then local implementation? Maybe Jennifer, I'll direct this to you.
Thank you. I think the federal oversight is both needed, but I think one of the conversations that we've been having, and I think I shared with you, is state versus federal. There's a state aspect to this as identified with this group, that every community has a different barrier or challenge that has to be addressed. The other end of this spectrum from an employer perspective is that employers don't see those boundaries. And so they need a nationally unified system for creating employers or being able to take people out of these systems at a threshold or a baseline that they can consume or move to the next level of employment. That federal oversight has been very helpful, working through the Department of Commerce and even the national standards being done through the Department of Labor. but the local funding doesn't always connect well to that federal oversight. And that's an area we're hoping to see some advancement over the next few years where that that barrier goes away and that there is both a combination of local funding with a national overlay for the other half of the equation with the companies.
That makes sense. I mean, especially when we are talking about multi-state companies, there is this tension. You need both. You need the federal overhead consistency, but then digital inclusion best practices, local implementation is obviously the way to go. That's a really good way of putting it. Thank you. I think I would be remiss to ignore the fact that right now there is a lot of uncertainty around these programs, around federal funding in general, and we're not really sure what's going to happen next. So Jennifer, is the current uncertainty over this funding causing any problems for you?
Well, I think that there are innate problems for all of us. I think we're all kind of curious what the next step is going to look like. Our wanton belief is that that funding is now released so that we can all advance the work that we are deeply engaged with and had already set up systems to be able to execute back in January when that announcement was made. The sooner we can get to that, the better off we are since those funds are there. And that information is not only out there for us, but that information is out there for many of the partners that we work with, including employers who are going, okay, we're ready to hit the ground running. When do we hit go? So I think we're all kind of in that holding pattern right now.
Makes total sense. So, I mean, given some of this current uncertainty, what do you think would happen if the funding were to disappear or be clawed back? Taylor, I'll direct this to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think just kind of building on what Jennifer was saying, we have a lot of systems that we put in place, built around this funding and this opportunity. I think for us, we all of our work is premised on local recruitment from the communities we serve, and so and we're kind of rare in our sector. We recruit at nearly 100%, and it's a long process that takes several months. And so it can be challenging for us to make sort of last second pivots, but one of the things that we do in our work is we're always, building sort of synergies between the grants that we're taking in. So we don't rely on any one grant opportunity. But as I said in my comments earlier, our goal is really to serve communities where national service has not often found its way. And these types of resources enable us to do that. And so we view it as a tremendous opportunity to really extend our reach to communities that often do not experience this type of federal support directly at the local level. And so I think it would be disappointing to not be able to provide that service.
Of course, and as it always is, some of these communities that are hardest to reach are also the ones that are most in need. So many of you have got these existing programs. I'd like to talk about some of the barriers that you're already seeing. Questions over the funding aside, when you're implementing them, what are some barriers to success? Sarah, I'll turn to you first.
Sure. We have changing priorities. So one of the things that you lose in a storm is like loss of vision and loss of community and how everything changes. We were tracking towards what I call thriving projects. We were taking people out of just surviving and helping them really live life and do that well. And now we've lost that. So we've spent a lot of money just triaging, band-aiding solutions. And it's a huge barrier to not be able to communicate on the front end or build trust with folks you didn't have that already established with.
That makes total sense. Now, just as a reminder to the audience, we've got a few minutes and then I will be turning to audience questions. So if you've got any, please feel free to put them in the chat. Going back to my previous question on the barriers that you're facing, Megan, I'd also like to hear some of what you're seeing.
I think the realization that everyone is impacted by either receiving the funds or not receiving the funds. But it impacts everyone from education to economy to housing to medical, transportation, food, even religion. We learned so much from COVID. So I think that the barrier is it's not a universal understanding of the impact that it will have on everyone.
Okay, thank you. That's a good way of putting it. Taylor, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I just think that, as I said, our focus, our mantra is about unlocking possibilities, right? We know that this is a door opener, and that it touches many aspects of our lives, many different sectors, and many things that we haven't seen yet manifest and be born yet. And so I think, you said it earlier, I think that this is a forever thing. This isn't just a one-time challenge. We know this is a forever thing. So what are we doing to build sort of the civic infrastructure that enables our country in every corner, at every level, to be able to open those doors and allow those doors to be opened by the members of those communities? And so, it's a tremendous first step, but there's a long way to go with it.
Yeah, and the thing to keep in mind is that the more we do now, the less we will have to do later. This is not going away, and the United States cannot shy away from achieving universal connectivity. The rest of the world is doing it. This is not an option of do we want to or do we not. It's something we actually have to do if we want to remain competitive. I think we are coming up on time now, so I would like to give each of you a minute to leave everyone with one final thought that you'd like to give to the audience. Sarah, I'll start with you.
Sure. Digital equity is for everyone, and we have kind of a unique experience that we want to share with. We feel like these sorts of climate events are only just beginning. I appreciated Megan saying thoughts about signing people up for FEMA. Like, let's get everyone ready now, because this is an emergency preparedness issue as much as it is any of these other community spaces, which is not typically a digital equity conversation. So there's an urgency in our current climate, literally, politically, and environmentally, to see some initiative move past this pilot phase of a program and into sustainable solutions.
Taylor.
Yeah, I mean, I think just to kind of continue the mantra we've been talking about today, I mean, I really think that this is all about maximizing investment that we've made as a country to build resiliency as a country. We are essentially building a lot of new infrastructure through broadband infrastructure. And, if we had built the interstate highway system without building cars and teaching people how to use that system, it wouldn't have been very effective, and we wouldn't have seen the commerce and the industry and the economic opportunities that emerge from that. And I view this very similarly.
Yeah, that's always such a good analogy. Would we build roads and then put no effort into making sure people have cars and know how to drive? That would be nonsensical. Thank you, Taylor. I'd like to pass it to Jennifer next.
The digital, I guess equity is the right word here, but reality is our digital literacy is a requirement in this day and age. There is no working around that. 70% of America does not go to college. That's consistent with Europe and Asia. That the difference is those two parts of the world also have apprenticeship in every single field. So that's the alternative. We've got to sustain this investment in order to get over those hurdles and get to a tipping point where there are alternative pathways for people not taking the college route in order to get into jobs. And to kind of make the case for why that's a necessity are the outcomes. And that is that if you are the employer, the cost of acquisition of new talent going through these other channels is 25% below their acquisition cost for a standard new hire, which is through poaching. For the government, that is amounting through these grants at a roughly $10,000 per person investment to get them ready for a job. And that $10,000 is paid back in tax base in under 18 months. That's just for the funds that are coming through us to cover the cost of getting them up to a skill level that they're consumable by a company. The people coming out of these programs are exactly doing that. They're getting some basic digital literacy and getting themselves prepared for moving on to that next step, whether it's in tech or any other field. And then for the apprentices, I can tell you, coming out of the apprenticeship program we run, their lifetime improved earnings are up over 1.7 million over what they would have earned without their apprenticeship. So this is really, I don't think, an investment we can afford not to make.
Great, thank you. Daiquiri, I'll turn to you next.
Yeah, absolutely. I think piggybacking off of my colleagues here, not only is this a historic investment that the federal government has made through IIJA monetarily, but this is also a huge investment in social capital. There's so much that has gone into the organizing and community outreach, community engagement, both by the state broadband offices, but also by these local community leaders. And we're really at a turning point here where we're able to either continue to build off of that momentum or see some of that slip. And I think what we're hearing from our grantees in the state-based coalitions is that the uncertainty of the funding landscape, the political environment, there's really a lot of hesitancy to continue to move forward. And just because we might not have the funding for the work, the need doesn't go away. If anything, we might see it, exacerbate the need, where right now there's just not enough resources to be able to meet that.
Absolutely. Megan?
Mine will just be short and sweet. I just believe that an investment into the services is an investment into the people. And so anytime we invest into people, we all benefit. When there's no investment, we all lose in essence.
So I know we're a little bit over time now. I would like to pass on at least one audience question to you. So we have one. If there's a story that you'd like to leave our audience with to take home with them about the importance and the impact of the programs these funds support, what would that story be in brief? And I will take volunteers for this question. For Taylor, would you like to take it?
I'm happy to. I mean, I think I have several I could tell, but I think kind of building on what Jennifer was saying, that there's a tremendous workforce development need tied to all of this, I think, as well. And I've seen on numerous occasions for within our work, where we have seen something as as small and simple as a service year experience that's built at the local level, turn into a new career that grows and emerges and supports future members in this work as well. And I've seen this across our cohort on a number of bases. One that stands to mind to me is a young man named Oliver in rural Nebraska. He came into this program, no prior experience in this work. As a young person, serving in his home community of 3,000 people. He served a region of 15 counties. He was able to bring together public and private partnerships to leverage millions of dollars to get people connected. He then went to college, got his master's degree. He's now serving at that same organization that hosted him in his service year and is a host site supervisor for that, for our member this year. And so, I mean, these are small investments that build that workforce development pipeline that we need in so many of these communities, that provide, to Jennifer's point, many alternative pathways to economic mobility and career success. It goes far beyond just broadband access and adoption. And I think that we have to see the bigger picture and the opportunity here in all the communities across the country. This isn't just a one community need situation. And so we see that on a regular basis. I could give hours of stories like that.
Thank you. We're a little bit over time, so I think I'll take one more response to this. Sarah, what do you think?
So we have a partnership with one of our groups here that works with a lot of reentry populations. And we've supplied them through a learn to earn system devices over the years. So they decide when that person's ready to get a device through a STEPS program that they're already working from the time that they re-enter into civilization, and then might be at a point where they get a job or they are getting an apartment, and they get this device to help them leverage those resources along with the digital skills necessary. And one of my favorite stories from this partnership we have with this group is this woman came out of the prison system. She got a device. She used it to finish her CNA. She got an apartment. She got her children back, and she got a car. And in my mind, this is an investment in this person's life. That's amazing, and we love that. But it also shows that for $200, I have spent a lot of government money, but for $200, I changed the total trajectory of somebody's life, not going back into prison ever again, and thus saving taxpayers a whole lot of money.
That is a great point and really speaks to the broader issue here. We are talking about an amount of money that is very small compared to what we've put into other issues, what we've put into broadband deployment. The DEA itself is not very large, but it is so incredibly pivotal. You know, I think we are coming up on time here, so I think that we've said all that we need to say. So to the audience, thank you so much for joining, and thanks so much to our panelists for a fascinating discussion. And I really hope that you all keep in mind what was said here today. Use of digital technologies is the future, and DEA funding, as we've all expressed, is absolutely